Sri Lanka is a small island country off the coast of India and is home to over 23 million residents. However, the population distribution of these inhabitants could not be more varying. On one side, we have the Sinhalese, the majority that rules the country through government and makes up around 80% of the population. And then, on the other side, we have the Tamils, the minority of around 10% of the population has been fighting for the right of a separate state. But the true question is, how did we get here?
The initial European colonization in Sri Lanka was established by Dutch authority through the Dutch East India Company, known as VOC, which was a trading enterprise founded in 1602 mainly to safeguard Dutch trading interests in the Indian Ocean. Initially, the VOC only controlled the coastal areas, but over time, the Dutch advanced inland, seizing substantial territories in the southern, southwest, and western parts of Sri Lanka.
In these early days, the Dutch started to expand east navally through the Dutch East India Company, or as we know them now as VOC. This is where you start to see the Dutch getting all the way out to India and what we know now as the beautiful island of Sri Lanka. Initially, they only went to these small coastal areas, these little inlets on Sri Lanka. That's all they needed to get from Sri Lanka for the trade and for the naval power. But as they realized all the valuable resources and all the value of Sri Lanka, they began to go more inland, really utilizing the full power and the full blunt of that country, of the beautiful country of Sri Lanka.
Subsequently, the British East India Company conquered Sri Lanka, referred to by the British as Ceylon, during the French Revolutionary Wars from 1792 to 1801. Following the Netherlands' occupation by the French, the British commenced their push into Sri Lanka from India. The Dutch surrendered in 1796 after a lackluster resistance. The British initially perceived their conquest as temporary and administered the island from Madras, modern-day Chennai.
We really start to see the Dutch start taking control of Sri Lanka and fully utilizing it. They split it up into 3 parts based in the 3 big cities, based all around Colombo, Galle, and Jaffna. Now, the main governor of Sri Lanka, who's Dutch, was based around in Colombo, but the 2 other areas were controlled by commanding officers. The main reason they started controlling and fully utilizing Sri Lanka is their expansion to the eastern coast. This is where they got the more agricultural benefits of it, like, for instance, the production of the highly valuable cinnamon in the eastern coast.
However, the conflict with France highlighted Sri Lanka's strategic importance, prompting the British to solidify their control over the island. In 1802, Ceylon was designated as a crown colony, and British ownership of maritime Ceylon was ratified through the Treaty of Amiens with France.
The British were able to easily take over Ceylon after the Dutch were focused on the French. This was during the French Revolutionary War, so the French had almost fully overwhelmed the Dutch, and so it left Sri Lanka up for the taking for the British. So the British were able to easily move in and take over Sri Lanka. At first, they didn't really see the benefits that the Dutch were seeing, but then they started seeing more and more agricultural and economic benefits, and it became a powerhouse for them.
By 1665, they had expanded to the eastern coast and thus gained control over most of the cinnamon-producing regions and key entry and exit points on the island. The Dutch governor, based in Colombo, served as the primary executive and was supported by a council consisting of high-ranking officials. The island was partitioned into 3 administrative regions named after their main cities, Colombo, Galle, and Jaffna. Colombo was governed by the governor, while commanders ruled over Galle and Jaffna.
Now in 1802, the British fully see the power of Sri Lanka, as the turmoil that they had with the French just highlighted how important it was, and how much they were fighting over it just showed that how valuable it was for both the French and the British to try and take control over. So this solidified Ceylon, or as we know it now, as Sri Lanka, as a powerful maritime source for either country.
The British removed restrictions on Ceylon's economy by getting rid of all state monopolies and abolishing mandatory labor service. They also encouraged economic freedom, which resulted in the emergence of new business ventures. Land owned by British Crown was sold at low prices to farmers to promote plantation agriculture, leading to lucrative outcomes.
After this development in agriculture, we start to see, coffee plantations start to form up. This is where coffee became a very, very important agricultural product from Ceylon. British started farming the heck out of this. They started fully devoting all of their resources and all their ways of building and all their farming to coffee.
The area devoted to coffee farming increased, and roads were built to meet the demands of coffee growers. Due to a labor shortage on the plantations, a large number of indentured workers from southern India began arriving in the 1840s.
Now, these workers from India, they may not seem very important right now, but they're going to prove to be very important later, as we start to see the Sinhalese and the Tamils start to quarrel later, as the Tamils originally had more people, especially in the other British colonies like India and other places in the east.
However, in the 1870s, coffee crops were severely impacted by a leaf disease. Experiments with tea as a plantation crop in the 1880s quickly proved to be successful, and tea cultivation spread across the upper and lower slopes of the hill country. Around the same period, rubber and coconuts were also introduced as plantation crops. The advent of capitalist enterprises brought about modifications in farming practices and gardening techniques, yet these advancements were primarily confined to urban regions and plantation areas. Meanwhile, the majority of the country continued in subsistence agriculture, relying on conventional methods.
The British continue with these agricultural methods for the next couple decades, and then we start to see the war period start, and Ceylon starts becoming more and more autonomous. The British people start appointing more and more leaders from Ceylon, not from Britain, and as we'll begin to see, Ceylon eventually is going to start becoming independent from the motherland.
Later, as World War II started, the British started to set Ceylon as a more independent nation. Ceylon finally became independent with the 1947 Ceylon Independence Act. This is where Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka, begins to head down a dark path. Another relevant policy was standardization, which sought to enhance educational prospects for underprivileged Sinhalese students. This policy mandated that Tamil students attain higher exam scores than their Sinhalese peers to gain admission to Sri Lankan universities. Legislators devised a scheme that mirrored affirmative action for the Sinhalese who faced disadvantages during the British colonialism. Under British colonial governance, tensions between the Sinhalese and Tamils intensified. Since Tamil communities were present in various other British colonies, such as India, South Africa, and Singapore, Sri Lankan Tamils were able to take advantage of extensive commercial networks and a broader spectrum of opportunities. While tensions existed between these groups prior to British rule, the developments that occurred after Sri Lanka gained independence indicate that colonial governance worsened the subsequent conflict. Following independence, numerous Sinhalese ascended to high positions within the government. These Sinhalese acquired power and progressively enacted laws that effectively disenfranchised their Tamil counterparts. One notable example is the infamous Sinhala Only Act. Former Sri Lankan President Chandrika Bandaranaike interprets this act, which her father supported, as an effort to foster and reclaim a Sri Lankan identity lost during the lengthy period of British rule. If Kamaratunga's perspective on her father's law is genuine and accurate, it could suggest that the legislators of that era aimed to restore the dignity of their Sinhalese identity, rather than to intentionally undermine Tamil culture. However, in hindsight, the laws ultimately led to suppression of Tamil culture.